Well, hello, this is Paul Douglas, and I'd like to welcome you back to A Letter to an Apostle. Today is interrogatory number 5, Anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. An anachronism is something or someone not found in its correct historical or chronological time, especially a thing or person that belongs to an earlier or a later time. A practical approach to confirm the authenticity of ancient or historical writings is the identification of anachronisms found within them. Anachronisms are chronological errors, and they might include the mention of events that could not possibly have occurred during the period under discussion. These errors can also include names, locations, language, tools, and so on that did not exist or were unknown at the time of the historical document being written. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 5, Shakespeare has Juliet utter, "The clock struck 9 when I did send the nurse." Romeo and Juliet is, however, set in the 1300s, well before the invention of the first mechanical pendulum clock. This is an anachronism. It's similar to the error that was made in the motion picture Spartacus, where the film editor failed to notice some of the slaves were sporting wristwatches. Now, the Bard of Avon was not trying to fool anyone, and a slave wearing a wristwatch at the time of Christ is hilarious. However, when we put serious writing to the anachronism test and it comes up short, it usually indicates fraud or deception. The Book of Mormon does not fare well when we put it to the anachronism test. The Book of Mormon cites horses 14 times, for example. However, not only is there no evidence that horses existed in North, Central, or South America during the time of the Book of Mormon, 2500 BC to 400 AD, indeed there is persuasive, compelling evidence that horses became extinct at the end of the Pleistocene era, 2.5 million to 12,000 years ago. Horses only reappeared in the Americas when the Spaniards brought them from Europe in about 1519. Elephants are mentioned in Ether 9:19, swinging their trunks for the Jaredites, 2500 BC, but again, fossil records show that they became extinct at the end of the last ice age, 10,000 years ago. Chariots are mentioned numerous times in the Book of Mormon, Alma 18:9 and 10, Alma 26, 3 Nephi 3:22, and yet there's no archaeological evidence to support the use of wheeled vehicles in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. They would also be of little use considering that there were no horses to pull them. Ether 9:18 refers to cattle, but here again there's no evidence that Old World domesticated cattle inhabited the New World before European contact. Likewise, iron and steel are cited several times. 1 Nephi 16:18, 2 Nephi 5:15, Jerem 1:8, Ether 7:9. Likewise, iron and steel are cited several times. 1 Nephi 16:18, 2 Nephi 5:15, Jerem 1:8, Ether 7:9. This is a problem, as there's no evidence of hardened steel being present in pre-Columbian America. A sophisticated metallurgical society would leave considerable evidence. The Book of Mormon refers to swords, stating that the blades thereof were cankered with rust, relating to the Jaredites' final battlefield, where some 250,000 warriors perished. But again, no such battlefield, no such soldiers, no such weapons have ever been found. 2 Nephi 5:14 and 15 reads, "And I, Nephi, did take the sword of Laban, and after the manner of it did make many swords, and I did teach my people to build buildings, and to work all manner of wood, and of iron, and of copper, and of brass, and of steel, and of gold, and of silver, and of precious ores, which were in great abundance." And how is it possible that such a small group of immigrants, likely no more than 50 to 100, managed to do all of the following in such a short period of time? Mine iron ore and extract elemental iron from it. Mine coal and refine it into coke as required in the production of iron. Make steel, a complicated process of mixing iron with carbon. Mine limestone, a necessary ingredient for the production of steel. Locate and mine copper, mine tin, mine zinc for the production of brass. Refine this tin and zinc, which does not appear in an elementary state. Develop expertise in prospecting, locating and identifying ores. Prospect for gold, locate and extract silver. Roast to eliminate sulfur, as required in the production of both copper and silver. Smelt and flux all of these metals. Construct blast furnaces to produce these metals and manufacture hardened mining tools. What an incredible, intrepid, and industrial little band. Mining, smelting, refining, roasting, which all leave indestructible and robust evidence. Yet in all of the Americas, let alone in the northeastern United States, there is no such evidence. Also, the story of the construction of a transoceanic vessel borders on the ridiculous. We learn in 1 Nephi that the Lord, in directing the building of a seagoing craft, tells Nephi where he can find iron ore to make the tools. The obvious question is, how could Nephi et al. Extract the iron ore without having tools? As well, Nephi tells us that they had to molten the iron to make the tools. One must ask, did they build blast furnaces hot enough to produce molten iron? That takes 1500 degrees Celsius. Burning wood can only produce a temperature of about 600 max, and coal is anachronistic to the Sinai Peninsula. Charcoal can produce higher temperatures, up to about 1100 degrees, using Nephi's bellows, but producing char is a complicated process requiring acres of hardwood, which is again anachronistic to the Sinai, and the construction of a charcoal furnace reaching temperatures of 1500 degrees is a real stretch. Good charcoal is mostly pure carbon, called char, which is made by cooking wood in a low oxygen environment, a process that can take days as it burns off volatile compounds such as water, methane, and hydrogen. When ignited, the carbon in this char combines with oxygen and forms carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, water, and other gases, packing more potential energy, however, per ounce than raw wood ever could. Char burns steadily and hot, but not 1500 degrees hot. A seagoing craft also requires metal strapping, and a great many nails, certainly in the thousands, if not the tens of thousands, would be required. Each has to be handmade. Joseph Smith was not just ignorant of what existed before the Spaniards appeared on this continent, but was also ignorant when it came to shipbuilding. He was, it would seem, only familiar with the canoes and flat-bottomed boats that went up and down the local Erie Canal. A real seagoing ship needs a keel, a flat blade sticking down into the water from the sailboat's bottom. It performs two important functions. It prevents the ship from being blown sideways by the wind and holds the ballast that keeps the ship right side up. I know a little bit about boating. I once owned a 53-foot motor yacht without a real keel, and a dozen of us would often sail around Puget Sound on it. Let me assure you that even with radar and sonar and GPS plotters on board, as well as another small boat on board, I would not be foolish enough to take my boat out onto the blue water, let alone try to cross the ocean. Also, the lumber created to build a seagoing vessel would require steaming to bring the bow to a point. Steaming lumber is no mean feat. This is problematic in two ways. First, you have to laminate and steam wood to make the keel. Secondly, you need a dry dock to build it because of the keel. You simply can't build your ship on skids and launch it into the sea. Building a dry dock with a deep enough hole for a ship that size, just the ship described in the Book of Mormon with watertight gates as well as a steaming chamber, is an enormous task and would have taken several years in itself to construct. Also, wood is porous and needs pitch or tar derived from oak to keep the boat from leaking. What about rope or the wool needed to make the sails? It takes 2 sheep to produce 1 square meter of sail, and you can only shear a sheep once a year. Therefore, hundreds of sheep are required. Where did these hundreds of needed sheep come from? Wild sheep? Feral sheep? How about the tall, straight trees needed for masts? How are they lifted into place? How did Nephi intend to steer the ship, as the rudder, requiring ropes and pulleys, wasn't invented until the 12th century? And Bountiful must have been a fabulous place, with surface iron ore, hundreds of acres of hardwood, and pasture land, as well as herds of wild or feral sheep. And perhaps most significantly, we have the problem of water. How do you carry enough water for the people and animals on board to make the crossing? Water's heavy, and since the barrel was not yet invented, how did they carry enough water for the long crossing? Clay jars? Not very smart on a ship being buffeted by waves. Maybe they tanned sheep bladders and made water skins, but tanning requires tannic acid, again only found in oak, and it takes years to properly produce. And you're going to need a lot of them. Lehi's voyage would have taken a long time, from the Arabian Peninsula to the western shores of Mesoamerica. The Book of Mormon is silent on how long the voyage actually lasted, but oceanographic research has shown, using drifters, that is, floating buoys that transmit their signals to satellites orbiting the Earth, that the route would have taken about 580 days. Medical experts tell us that an adequate daily fluid intake of about 15.5 cups, that's 3.7 liters of fluids for a man, and about 11.5 cups or 2.7 liters of fluids a day for women are required. If we assume a group of about 45 people, John L. Sorensen concluded, for example, that 40 to 50 people entered the boat that carried the group to the Promised Land. That means, not considering the livestock on board and assuming that no one ever bathed, they would require 83,000 liters, or about 22,500 gallons of water on the ship to make the crossing. Certainly rain would have been collected, but how do you estimate how much? What if there was no rain? It's not inconceivable that the trip was largely in fair weather. That amount of water would have weighed 188,000 pounds, or 94 tons. If sheep water skins were used to carry the water on the voyage, over 30,000 sheep would have had to be slaughtered to harvest enough bladders. Is Smith's yarn beginning to sound a little bit far-fetched? 6 times silk is spoken of in the Book of Mormon. 1 Nephi 13:7, Alma 1:29, Alma 4:6, Ether 9:17, Ether 10:24. Silk, of course, is a product of the Orient, an unknown in pre-Columbian America. The word compass, Alma 37:38, is dated to 73 BC in the Book of Mormon, even though this instrument was not invented until the 12th century. Alma 11 is also problematic in that it mentions a monetary system based on weights of precious metals and strongly implies the use of coins. However, recognizing the anachronistic problem of New World coins showing up before the time of Christ, the Church made yet another change to the most correct book on earth, removing the reference of coinage from the introduction of Alma 11. Before the change, the introduction read, "Judges and their compensation, Nephite coins and measures, Zisram, founded by Amulek." The introduction's reference to Nephite coins and measures was written by a committee, although James Talmage is given special credit. I guess we're now to believe that it was just sloppy work on the part of Talmage, even though his biographer, James P. Harris, noted that Talmage was customarily meticulous, making sure that there were no errors or omissions. As well, regardless of the Church's willingness to throw Talmage under the bus, the introductions and footnotes were undoubtedly approved by the First Presidency. We have, of course, never found any evidence of the Alma 11 monetary system, nor have any coins been unearthed. Not a Sion, not a Shum, not an Anor, not a Isram, not even an Unti. The Church's position now that the Sion, the Shum, and so on were not coins, even though their reference as pieces of their gold and pieces of their silver would suggest the opposite. LDS apologists now take the narrow view that these pieces of metal of particular weights and values are not coins because they were not minted or inscribed. Their mention in the Book of Mormon indicates, however, they were used as coins, and I'm quoting now, "And the judge received for his wages, according to his time, a senine of gold for a day, a senum of silver, which is equal to a senine of gold. And this is according to the law which was given, Now these are the names of the different pieces of their gold and their silver according to their value. And that's from Alma 11, 1-19. For many decades, of course, Alma 11 has been understood by members to be speaking about coins. B.H. Roberts, an LDS 70 and church historian, wrote, "In addition to these words, we also have a number of names of Nephite coins and the names of fractional values of coins." Brother Roberts continues his use of the term coins. "We have no means of obtaining specific value for these coins in modern terms, and there is stated a system of relative values in these coins that bear evidence of them being genuine." That comes from A New Witness of God 3:145. In 1979, the Book of Mormon Student Manual, Religion 121 and 122, asked students how valuable were the Nephite pieces of money, showing that the pieces meant coins. The manual presents a chart to show the relative value of silver and gold coins under the system set up by Mosiah. The difficulty, of course, does not lie in the lack of any Nephite coins being unearthed. It lies in Smith's suggestion that such coins existed in the first place. So Alma 11 paints the church and her apologists into a corner. Either it presents more artifacts that have never been confirmed by archaeology, or it's yet another of the many anachronisms found in Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon. The word Bible denotes a canon of Scripture, 2 Nephi 29:3, and it's problematic. The word Bible is the Anglicization of the Greek word biblica, which means book. The problem here is that Greek wasn't spoken in Israel until long after Lehi's supposed emigration to the Americas at about 600 BC. 2 Nephi 31 references the Holy Ghost, but the word ghost did not come into parlance until hundreds of years after it was inscribed in the Book of Mormon. The name Isabel, Alma 39:3, given to a harlot, first appears in France and Italy in the Middle Ages. Again, wrong time, wrong place. 6 times we find the abbreviation for and so forth, the aposan and small c, a convention particular to the 19th century in the Book of Mormon. Never used before, never used after. The words Alpha and Omega appear in 3 Nephi 9:18. These 2 words are, of course, the English spellings of the Greek words found in the Book of Revelations in the Bible. As the Book of Mormon was not recorded in Greek, why do these words appear? Most obviously, the answer is that Smith simply copied them from the King James Version of the Bible, which he had access to. There are numerous instances where Smith used words that were not relevant to his time, but particular to the English spoken in the early 1600s. Playest, durst, thou, thee, thy, thine, hast, doth, knoweth, hearest, cometh, thirsteth. Did God select these words for the Book of Mormon? No. It demonstrates the writer's exposure to the King James terminology. One must ask, why would the Book of Mormon be translated into King James, Elizabethan English in the first place? The language was neither spoken in 1830 America nor in the day of Mormon Moroni et al. Does God speak Elizabethan English? Or was this a cunning ploy by Smith used to give his writing greater gravitas and also make the numerous passages that he plagiarized from the King James Version of the Bible fit more seamlessly? Scores of passages in the Book of Mormon, either in part or in whole, verbatim or paraphrase, have come directly from the King James Version of the Bible. Perhaps the most egregious error Smith made throughout the Book of Mormon was the use of the word Christ. He used it as if it were the surname of the Lord Jesus. However, as any seminarian will tell you, the word Christ is the Anglicization of the Greek word Christos, meaning the anointed or chosen one, the equivalent of the Hebrew word Messiah. Much has been made of the appearance of the French word adieu, Jacob 7:27, because it's so obviously and ridiculously out of place. And of course, there's the Isaiah problem. Nearly all biblical scholars doubt that the book of Isaiah was written by one person. They tend to date the last third of Isaiah to the 6th century BCE, some 200 years after Isaiah's death, and well after Lehi's family left Jerusalem with the brass plates. If chapters 40 to 66 were not written until after Lehi's departure, then what are they doing in the Book of Mormon? For example, Isaiah 44:28 mentions Cyrus, who we know lived 200 years after Isaiah, and long after Lehi. Likewise, the threats against Babylon found in Isaiah 47:1 and 48:14 were well after Lehi's voyage to the New World. Is it not then surprising that non-Mormon archaeologists and scholars have concluded that the Book of Mormon's many anachronisms, let alone its subject matter, clearly reveals the 19th century origins, leading to the inescapable, indisputable conclusion that it's a work of fiction, composed during Joseph Smith's time, and nothing more. Fair Mormon produced this attractive chart. This chart is intended to show how many things believed to be anachronistic in 1842 have now been proven to have existed in the Americas in Book of Mormon times. The problem it contains, however, is bogus. For example, in the 2005 iteration, it lists Hebrew language, brass plates and swords, steel and otherwise, as confirmed. When and where were these things confirmed, and by whom? I'm also curious as to why horses are listed as indeterminate. Perhaps this is referring to their Tabor postulate. Let me assure you that the Hebrew language, swords, steel and otherwise, have never been recovered or discovered in North America, in Central America, or in South America. Fair Mormon's colorful chart notwithstanding. If the LDS Church has what this chart says that they do, would they not be trumpeting all of these important discoveries across their media and beyond? In addition to horses, it also lists as indeterminate goats, large armies, and this language that no one's ever heard of, Reformed Egyptian. I've traveled to Egypt and examined hieratic script with non-Mormon archaeologists from Alexandria to Aswan, and have visited most of the tombs and temples in between. I've never seen evidence of this peculiar language, nor do I know any Egyptian scholars who have ever heard of Reformed Egyptian. Where is the evidence that backs any of these classifications? Many professional linguists would love to know more about the discovery of the Hebrew language in the Americas that this chart confirms. Somehow every non-Mormon linguist seems to have missed this groundbreaking find that the nameless scholars at Fair Mormon have discovered. The discovery of the Hebrew language in ancient America is not a subject of debate. It's well established that there have never been any discoveries whatsoever relating to the Hebrew language on this continent. Some Mormon apologists have suggested that the horses spoken of in the Book of Mormon were really deer. Give me a break. I have a spread on the North Saskatchewan River up in Alberta, Canada, on which roam the odd moose, bear, cougar, and many, many white-tailed deer. Let me assure you, having directly observed the temperament of this animal for decades, that it's beyond absurd to suggest that you could ride them. Here, once again, Fair Mormon drags out their go-to archaeologist, scholar, apologist, John L. Sorensen, to spin another tale. This time it's out of silk, and I'm quoting him. Linen and silk are textiles mentioned in the Book of Mormon, Alma 4:6. Neither fabric, as we know them, was found in Mesoamerica at the coming of the Spaniards. The problem might be no more than linguistic. Bernal Diaz, who served with Cortez in the initial wave of conquest, described native Mexican garments made out of henequen, which is like linen, the fiber of the meniki plant, from which henequen was manufactured, closely resembles the flax fibers used to make European linen. Several kinds of silk, too, were reported by the conquerors. One kind was of thread spun from the fine hair on the belly of rabbits. Okay, so according to Sorensen then, they didn't really exist. It was just a big misunderstanding. A matter of labels. Semantics. When the Book of Mormon says linen, it means henequen. Silk is not silk, but really the hair of the belly of rabbits. Barley is horiquen, a species of grass, native to the Americas. By horse, Mormon writers mean tabors. By cattle, they meant buffalo. And when they used the word pig, it was really code for the chick, a wonderfully active small dog with a snout like a sucking pig. Fair Mormon also states that when they say directly support, they typically mean that they're looking for direct collaboration, such as the presence of the name Nephi or Zarahemla in association with ancient American archaeological data. First, I'm not sure who they are, but if they're archaeologists, I doubt that they're looking for road signs when they speak of direct collaboration. I would suggest that direct collaboration would be the discovery of evidence of the places, animals, or technology that match the Book of Mormon's claims. The skeletal remains of an elephant would be an example of direct collaboration. one piece of armor, or a sword from the many battles involving millions of people would be direct collaboration. None of these, of course, are indicated. Rather, Fair Mormon provides yet another quote by Sorensen, this time without citation. Without even considering smelted iron, we find that the peoples in Mesoamerica exploited iron minerals from early times. Lumps of hematite, magnetite, and ilmenite were brought into the valley of Oxama sites from some of the 36 ore exposures located near or in the valley. These were carried to a workshop section within the site of San Jose Mogate as early as 1200 BC. There they were crafted into mirrors by sticking the fragments into prepared mirror backs and polishing the surfaces highly. These objects, clearly of high value, were then traded at considerable distances. I can understand why Sorensen starts without even considering smelted iron, as there was none to consider. Instead, he talks about lumps of meteoric minerals fashioned into primitive mirrors as being proof of iron and steel. Fair Mormon again trumpets the discovery of wild barley in Arizona. While I would like to have seen some peer-reviewed articles on this is something that the reader might want to investigate further, as it indeed refutes the critics who say that barley did not exist in the Americas. The December 1983 issue of the magazine Science 83 reports the discovery in Phoenix, Arizona, by professional archaeologists of what they described as pre-Columbian barley. That same month, farms carried a preliminary notice of the discovery. Mosiah 9:9 lists barley among the several crops that were cultivated by the Nephites in the land of Nephi, and Alma 11:7 singles out barley as the primary grain into which silver and gold were converted in the Nephite system of weights and measures. In a blog article entitled Barley Found in the New World, Raymond C. Treat heralds this find, and I'm quoting, "This discovery constitutes one of the most important archaeological discoveries and breakthroughs ever in support of the Book of Mormon. If this identification of barley is valid, and it appears to be, it will cause a major shift in the thinking of New World archaeologists, a shift that will be a giant step forward towards the ever-growing physical validation of the Book of Mormon's history." Mr. Treat may be a little too enthusiastic. Keep in mind that a few grains of wild barley in Arizona does not parallel the domesticated variety taken from the Holy Land to the Americas and used to feed millions of people. The simple truth is, the Mormon Church has nothing, but as an act of desperation produces very sketchy evidence. For example, there's a pre-Columbian city located in the Yucatan Peninsula called Telum, which is often referred to in LDS tour packages as a possible Book of Mormon site. The tour guides describe it as one place mentioned in the Book of Mormon and make a big fuss over the depiction of the descending God, which the guides often tell their naive Mormon tourists what they want to hear, that it was a depiction of Christ. The problem is that extensive archaeological research conducted at Telum has shown that the time is all wrong. All structural and ceramic evidence at Telum and its corpus of murals and reliefs date from the middle to the late post-classical era, that's 1200 to 1520 period. The Ancient History Encyclopedia has this to say: while it has long been held that Telum is the only temple complex to depict the descending God, this image has been found elsewhere. Attempts to link him to the figure of Jesus Christ has been dismissed by all reputable scholarly authorities. In addition, competent non-Mormon archaeologists believe that the descending God, also known as Koba or Sail, are commonly thought, based on their apparent antennae and insect-like torsos, to represent the bee god, Muzakkab, known from the Madrid Codex. So again, President Uchtdorf, another F. Well, this concludes today's episode. Please tune in next week when we'll discuss DNA in the Book of Mormon. Until then, this is Paul Douglas wishing you all the very best.